Good evening and welcome back. Pull up a chair or settle into whatever corner of the world you happen to be in right now. The fire is low, but it is enough. If you feel like it, drop a message somewhere and tell me where you're listening from. I always like to imagine the geography of who is out there, in what light, under what kind of sky. Tonight, we're going back a very long way. We're going back to before there was a sky, before there was anything to put under it, before the word before had any meaning at all. We're going to talk about the sun, not the sun as a burning ball of gas, though it is that too, and it will be that long after everything we discussed tonight has dissolved into myth and footnote and dust. We're going to talk about the sun as the Egyptians understood it, as a mind, a will, a hierarchy of selves, as a god who was also many gods, as a story that the Nile Valley told itself for 3,000 years in an attempt to understand why the light returns each morning and what it costs. It costs quite a lot, it turns out. There is no single Egyptian mythology. This is the first thing to say, and perhaps the hardest thing to hold on to as we go. What survived? On temple walls, on papyrus, in coffin texts and pyramid texts, and the grinding bureaucratic record of religious administration is a palimpsest, a city of stories built on top of other stories, some of them contradicting each other with a cheerfulness that suggests the Egyptians were less interested in consistency than in accumulation. Different cities had different versions. Heliopolis said one thing, Memphis said another. Hermopolis offered a third option that didn't entirely agree with either. When the priests of later centuries tried to reconcile all of this, they didn't discard the competing versions, they layered them. They let Re be Ra, be Atum, be Khepri, be Amun-Ra, all at once, in a kind of theological polyphony that sounds like chaos until you realize it sounds more like jazz. Structured improvisation, variations on a theme, the theme itself impossible to state simply. The theme is the sun rises, the sun crosses the sky, the sun descends into the darkness, the sun rises again. Everything else is commentary. The beginning, and it is hard to begin at the beginning when the beginning is defined as the place before anything began, before location, before direction, before the concept of here. The beginning was water. The Egyptians called it Nun. And Nun was not simply water in the way that a river is water or the sea is water. Nun was the totality of undifferentiated wet potential, the primordial ocean, the precondition for everything. In some accounts, Nun is a god with form and face. In others, Nun is simply what was there before form was possible, a substance that contained all futures without actualizing any of them, a darkness so complete that it could not even register its own completeness. And somewhere in this infinite dark wet nothing, a mound appeared. Some say it rose from the waters on its own, the way an island surfaces after a flood recedes. Some say it was willed into being by a consciousness that was already somehow present within the waters, inchoate and aware of its own inchoateness, aware enough to want to end it. The mound is called the Primordial Hill, the Benben, the first solid thing, and the moment it broke the surface of Nun, it created the first distinction in the universe, up and down, above and below, dry and wet. The god who stood on this mound, or who was this mound, depending on the version you consult, was Atum. And Atum is worth dwelling on because Atum is one of those divine figures who contains a paradox so fundamental that the Egyptians never quite resolved it. And the fact that they never resolved it may be precisely the point. Atum's name is usually translated as the complete one or the totality, and it also carries connotations of the one who did not exist, the one who ceased, the absence that preceded presence. He is, in other words, simultaneously everything and nothing. He is the God of the moment before creation and the God who enacted creation by stepping out of that moment. He is both the ocean and the island. This is not a contradiction. This is a description of what it means to be a source. Atum created the first two children, Shu, god of air, and Tefnut, goddess of moisture, through an act of solitary generation. The texts vary on the specifics, and I will say only that they were neither wholly comfortable nor wholly comfortable to read by later, more squeamish traditions. The point is this: the first creative act was one of self-sufficiency. Atum needed no partner, he needed only will. He breathed himself into two, and where there had been one closed totality, there were now three distinct beings, and between them they had invented the atmosphere. Shu held up the sky, Tefnut gave the sky its moisture, and the first world began to have weather. Shu and Tefnut, in their turn, produced Geb and Nut, the earth and the sky, distinguished now from the undifferentiated waters of Nun, given shape and gender and name. Geb lay flat and became the ground beneath all living things. Nut arched over him, her body the vault of heaven, her belly studded with stars, and between them there was, for a time, no separation. They lay in perpetual embrace, and nothing could grow between them, and the world was full and suffocating and complete in a way that left no room for anything new. Shu separated them. This is one of the first and most decisive acts in Egyptian cosmogony, and it is depicted in image after image on temple walls. Shu standing, his arms raised, his figure wedged between the flat, recumbent form of Geb below and the arching body of Nut above, holding the sky up with effort that is permanent and never completed. The air between earth and sky is, in this reading, not empty. It is the ongoing labor of a god. It is what it costs to have a world in which things can live and move and grow. Geb and Nut had children of their own, and the children of earth and sky are the ones whose stories would echo loudest through the next 3,000 years of Egyptian religious imagination. They had four: Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys. Some accounts add a fifth, Horus the elder, distinguished from Horus the younger who comes later. The divine genealogy grows complicated with use, as divine genealogies tend to do. But those four are the ones who matter most for what comes next. The sun in all of this is not yet fully present as a personality. Atum is solar. His name and function are associated with the setting sun, the sun and its moment of exhaustion and withdrawal at day's end. But the sun as a daily actor, as a charioteer or boat captain crossing the sky, is something that crystallizes later in the tradition, or that existed simultaneously in a parallel tradition that merged and mingled with the Heliopolitan cosmogony over centuries of theological negotiation. What is clear is this: from the first mound, from the first act of self-generation, from the separation of earth and sky, something was being prepared. A stage was being built, and the drama that would be played out on it would have at its center a burning eye, the eye of Ra. The children of Geb and Nut grew into themselves in the world that their grandparents and great-grandparents had built, and the world was, at this point, something we might hesitantly call a golden age, though the Egyptians themselves did not often use this framing, and applying it is a small act of interpretive violence that I commit knowingly and with apology. It was the age of divine rule. The gods walked the earth in forms that could be seen. Osiris was king, and under his kingship, humanity was taught the arts of civilization, agriculture, law, the proper conduct of burial rites, the grinding of grain, the brewing of beer. Isis, his queen and sister, Egyptian royal theology, had its own relationship with consanguinity, and the divine model set the pattern. Isis was already becoming what she would be for the next several thousand years of human religious imagining. The great magician, the weaver, the one who knew more names than was safe to know. There are accounts, fragmentary and strange, of Atum's own reign over the gods, before he grew weary of it, before he handed something of his authority to his grandson Osiris. And there are accounts of the sun god Ra, as a separate entity altogether, an elder divinity who ruled the world in the time before memory was reliable, before the current gods had taken their places. Re ruled, and the world obeyed. But Re grew old. This is the part that tends to unsettle modern readers, and I think the Egyptians intended it to unsettle. The sun grows old. Not dies, never quite dies, but ages. Re's bones became silver, his flesh gold, his hair lapis lazuli. He sat on his throne and he was magnificent, and he was also very, very old, and the creatures he had made on the earth began to notice. They began to whisper. Some of them began to scheme. Humanity, and in some accounts, it is humanity specifically, the beings Re had created from his tears or from his eye, depending on the version. Humanity looked at the old god and saw fragility, and what people do when they see fragility in the powerful is not always kind. Plots were formed, rebellions muttered in corners. Re found out, and he called a council of the elder gods, and they advised him to send his eye, the solar eye, the terrible burning weapon that was both his instrument and, in some sense, his daughter, his extension, his rage made manifest. They advised him to send his eye to punish the rebels. The eye went. The eye was Hathor sometimes, was Sekhmet other times, the lion-headed goddess of destruction, the consuming heat of the midday sun when it becomes not life-giving, but murderous. She went into the deserts and the settlements, and she killed. She killed with the specific enthusiasm of the righteous executioner who's been waiting for permission. And then she could not stop. Re watched from his throne and saw that the killing was becoming something else, something that would leave nothing behind, and he felt, what? Regret is perhaps too simple a word for what a god feels when his instrument of justice becomes an instrument of extinction. He ordered the killing stopped. Sekhmet/Hathor would not stop. The taste of blood had become something she needed, something that explained and completed her. The gods mixed red ochre with beer, vast quantities, a flood, and poured it out across the killing ground. Sekhmet/Hathor saw the red tide and believed it was blood, and she drank it and became drunk and slept, and the killing was over. The world was saved, but Re was done with it. He had looked at what his creation had required of him, the punishment, the countermeasure, the manipulation of his own divine instrument, and he climbed onto the back of the celestial cow Nut, or the goddess Mehet-Weret, or the great heavenly cow whose name shifts depending on the text. And he rose up. He withdrew. He took himself to the sky. He is there still. This is one version of why the sun is in the sky and not on the earth. This is one answer to the question of why the divine and the human do not occupy the same ground. Now the sky had a rider, and the rider was old, and the old rider still had enemies. There is a figure in the Egyptian theological imagination who never receives quite enough attention and who was also, paradoxically, almost too important to look at directly. His name was Apophis, Apep, and he was the great serpent, the embodiment of chaos, the one thing that the sun faced every night without exception. He lived in the underworld, in the duat, in the tunnels and caverns and dark waters beneath the world, and every night as the solar bark carrying the sun through the 12 hours of darkness made its passage, Apophis was waiting. Every night he tried to swallow the sun. Every night he failed. Every morning the sun rose again. This was not for the Egyptians a myth that had happened once and was over. This was something that was happening continuously, cosmically, at every moment. The daily rising of the sun was not automatic. It was earned. It was the result of a battle fought in darkness, assisted by the dead and by the gods of the underworld. And if the possibility was always there, shimmering at the edge of the theology, if Apophis ever won, the sun would not rise. The world would end, not metaphorically. The light would stop and the darkness would be absolute. Temples throughout Egypt performed rituals of protection every day. Priests stabbed effigies of Apophis with knives, burned representations of the serpent, recited spells of binding and banishment. The state apparatus of Egyptian religion was, in part, a great machine for keeping the sun moving, for keeping the light coming back. Consider what this means for how the Egyptians understood their role in the cosmos. They were not passive recipients of divine bounty. They were participants. Their prayers, their rituals, their moral conduct, these things mattered to the machinery of the universe. They were not merely people living under the sun. They were, in some sense, people keeping the sun alive. The birth of the solar deity as a daily phenomenon, the understanding of the sun as something that was born, aged, died, and was reborn every single day, produced one of the most sophisticated pieces of theological engineering in the ancient world. The Egyptians did not simply say the sun rises. They identified 3 distinct aspects of the solar journey and gave each aspect its own name, its own personality, its own iconography, its own relationship with the human world. At dawn, the sun was Khepri, the scarab beetle, rolling the ball of the sun up over the horizon, the way a beetle rolls a ball of dung across the sand. It is an analogy that has struck more than a few later observers as undignified, and it is worth pausing to understand why the Egyptians thought it magnificent. The scarab beetle takes something inert and apparently useless and rolls it through its own efforts into something that generates new life. The larvae hatch from the dung ball. The young sun rises from the eastern horizon. The comparison is not between excrement and the sun. The comparison is between the labor of generation and and the miracle of renewal. Khepri is the sun becoming itself. Khepri is the sun in the moment of its own self-creation. At noon, the sun was Ra, Re, the burning eye at its height, the full force of the light without mitigation or apology. Ra is the executive. Ra is the one who rules, who commands, who sends his eye to do his bidding, who sits at the prow of the solar bark with a staff in his hand and a crown on his head, and the full weight of cosmic authority behind every word he speaks. He is also the one who faces Apophis each night, who depends on his divine crew to beat back the serpent, who is, in this sense, not omnipotent but contingently powerful, strong enough but not infinite. He needs help. The dependence is part of what makes him endearing, or what made him so to the Egyptians. At sunset, the sun was Atum. We are back to where we started, the old god, the complete one, the one whose name carries the ghost of ending. Atum at sunset is the sun in its accumulated wisdom, in its exhaustion, in the gravity of everything it has seen. And in some versions, when the solar bark descends into the Duat, Atum merges with Osiris, the dead sun god embracing the Lord of the Dead, two figures of endings recognizing each other in the dark. From their meeting, from this nightly union, renewal is generated. The morning Khepri is born from the union of Ra-Atum and Osiris in the darkness of the underworld. Death is where the sun is born. Let me collect the thread here for a moment, because we've been moving through a lot of cosmological territory, and I want to make sure we haven't lost the shape of what's been established. We have the primordial waters, the first mound, Atum's self-generation, and the creation of the first divine family, the separation of earth and sky, the age of divine rule on earth, Re's withdrawal to the sky after the near destruction of humanity, and the great cosmic engine, the solar bark, Apophis, the daily death and rebirth. These are the structural bones. Now we can talk about what happens on the earth below that sky, among the gods who are left there. Among the gods who are left, the most important story is the story of Osiris and what his brother did to him, Set. And I want to be careful here about how to frame Set, because the Egyptians themselves were careful and ambivalent about how to frame him, and the story becomes impoverished if we make him simply the villain. Set was the god of storms, of the desert, of the red land that surrounded the black fertile soil of the Nile Valley. He was chaos, but useful chaos. He was violence, but necessary violence. At the prow of the solar bark, during the nightly battle with Apophis, it was Set who drove his spear into the serpent's head. The sun needed Set to survive. The cosmos needed Set, but Set needed something too. He needed to be first. He needed what Osiris had. The murder of Osiris is one of the oldest and most resonant stories in human civilization, and it has been told in so many versions that its core has become almost impossible to excavate cleanly. The most complete account we have comes from Plutarch, a Greek writer of the 1st century CE, which means it is filtered through Greek sensibilities and Greek narrative conventions, and is at least 2,000 years downstream from when the story first began to crystallize. What the Egyptian texts themselves give us are fragments, illusions, the aftermath more often than the act. It is as if the story was so well known that it never needed to be told whole. Everyone already knew it, the way you do not need to explain the plot of a story that has been in the air since before anyone can remember. What Plutarch gives us, and what seems to correspond to the Egyptian evidence in its broad strokes. Set invited Osiris to a banquet. He had prepared a beautiful chest, a coffin made to Osiris's exact dimensions. And here, the story has that particular quality of fairy tale logic where you don't quite ask how Set knew the measurements, because the wrongness of the act is already announcing itself through the gift. Whoever could fit exactly into the chest could keep it, Set said. This was the game. And Osiris, who was the king, and who was generous, and who perhaps trusted too easily, Osiris climbed in. Set and his conspirators sealed the lid and threw the chest into the Nile. Some say Osiris drowned. Some say the chest killed him when the lid was shut. What matters is that when Isis went looking for her husband, she found a dead man. And everything she did next is the reason the story survived. Isis found the chest, borne by the Nile to the shores of a far kingdom, Byblos in some accounts, where it had washed up and a great tree had grown around it. And a king had had the tree cut and the trunk made into a pillar in his palace. And Isis had to go as a servant to that king's household and steal back her husband's body from the very heart of a foreign palace without anyone realizing what she was doing. She succeeded. She almost always succeeds. There is a quality to Isis's magic that is less like divine power and more like relentless competence. She is the one in the room who has simply thought about it harder than anyone else, who has prepared more carefully, who knows which lever to pull and when. She brought Osiris back to Egypt. She used her wings to fan the breath of life back into his body, at least temporarily, at least enough. And from that temporary rekindling, Horus was conceived, the posthumous child of the dead god and the living goddess, the heir. Set was not finished. When he discovered that Isis had recovered the body, he took it. Some say he found her with it while she slept. Some say he ambushed her, and he dismembered it. 14 pieces, or 12, or 16. The number varies. What doesn't vary is the multiplicity, the determined thoroughness of the desecration. He scattered them across Egypt. Isis gathered them, piece by piece, region by region, she and Nephthys, her sister, Set's own wife, caught in the terrible middle of a family catastrophe. They traveled to every place and gathered what was left. Every piece that was found, a temple was built there. The scattered body of Osiris became a map of sacred sites. His dismemberment seeded the land with holiness. One piece she did not find, the piece that the Nile fish had eaten, depending on which text, the piece that was simply gone. And in some accounts, Isis fashioned a replacement from gold, and in others, she did not replace it and managed anyway. And in still others, the absence is simply acknowledged and left unresolved, the way some wounds in a story require resolution and some do not. Osiris was reassembled. He was bandaged. He was made whole in the sense that he could exist, could function, could reign, but he could not return to the living world. He became the Lord of the dead, the King of the Duat, the Judge of hearts. His kingdom was the Underworld, and he ruled it with a patience and a serenity that the Egyptians associated not with resignation, but with wisdom. He had been through the worst thing, and he had not dissolved. And so he understood something about persistence that the living cannot fully know. The sun grew up in hiding. Isis sheltered Horus in the marshes of the delta, in the reeds where Set could not find him. And the growing of a god in secret in the wetlands is one of those images that carries tremendous emotional weight in the Egyptian imagination. The vulnerability of the divine, the smallness of the future king, the necessity of concealment for something great to survive. There are accounts of dangers during this period: scorpions, snakebite, illness sent by Set. And each time, Isis's magic was sufficient. Each time, just barely, Horus survived. And when he was old enough, he demanded what was his: the trial of Horus and Set, because that is what it became. A cosmic trial before the tribunal of the gods, presided over by Re and various elder divinities, lasted, in some accounts, 80 years. The gods could not reach agreement. They argued, they debated. Some sided with Set, who was powerful and who had, after all, kept the bark safe from Apophis night after night, whose strength the cosmos needed. Some sided with Horus, who was the legitimate heir by descent, whose father had been murdered, whose case was just. Re himself seemed to resist the obvious conclusion for reasons that the texts never quite make explicit, and Thoth and Isis argued and maneuvered, and occasionally the whole proceeding descended into something that looked much less like divine justice and much more like the court politics of any sufficiently complicated royal house. In the end, Horus received the throne of Egypt. The living world was his. Set was not destroyed. Set was given the sky, the storms, the red desert. He was assigned chaos, properly bounded. He retained his seat on the solar bark. The verdict was not annihilation, but renegotiation. Even the villain in this theology had a necessary function that could not simply be eliminated. But the verdict left a wound, because between the murder and the judgment, the world had already changed. Osiris was already dead. The age of gods walking the earth was already over. The kings of Egypt who followed were not gods in the same way. They were the successors of Horus, identified with Horus in life and with Osiris in death, carrying the divine inheritance at one remove. The story of the divine succession passed into the story of the human succession, and the kings became the hinge between the two, the figures who were mortal and divine at once, who reenacted the trial and the judgment and the inheritance in every coronation, in every death, in every transfer of power. The age of divine presence had become the age of divine representation. There were those who said this was a degradation, and those who said it was simply what time does to everything. The ages of the world, in Egyptian thinking, do not follow a single clean progression from gold to silver to bronze to iron, the way Hesiod would later describe in Greece. What Egyptian religious thought does preserve, in scattered and sometimes contradictory accounts, is a sense of increasing distance between the divine and the human, between the original creative moment and the present, between what the world was intended to be and what it has become, the reign of the gods directly, the age of Osiris and the gifts of civilization, the great crisis of the murder, the long argument before the tribunal, the succession of human kings, each one an Horus who would become an Osiris, each generation further from the mound in the primordial waters, each generation carrying more of the weight of accumulated history and less of the original light. And yet, the sun still rises. Every morning the scarab beetle rolls the sun up over the horizon, and the rising is a miracle that has happened approximately 1.5 million times in the course of recorded Egyptian history. And it was treated as a miracle each time. The morning hymns to Ra in the temples were not routine. They were urgent. They were songs of relief. You have come, you have come. The sun has returned. Every morning, the note of surprised gratitude. Every morning, the acknowledgement that this was not guaranteed. Now, let us talk about specific people, or specific gods who became specific people in the texture of their stories. Let us talk about Ra himself in the fullness of his aspect, not as the abstract solar principle, but as the king, the ruler, the one who made decisions and bore consequences, who grew old in the world and finally had to leave it. Ra, the accounts agree, was the first pharaoh, the original king, the one against whom all subsequent kingship was measured. He ruled in the time before separation, when gods and humans were not yet on clearly different planes of existence, when the boundary between divine and mortal was a matter of degree rather than kind. He ruled with the authority of the one who had spoken creation into being, or who had inherited it from Atum, or who was simply the hottest and most undeniable thing in the world. An authority often goes to the thing that is most undeniable. He was old before there was a category for old. His bones were silver, yes, but what does it mean for a god's bones to be silver? It means he was precious, and he was worked upon by time, and he was changed from what he had been. The gold of the gods is living gold, warm gold, the gold of the sun at its height. Silver is lunar, reflected, the light that the sun casts secondhand upon a dead surface. When Ra's bones became silver, he had already become a memory of what he was, and yet he did not stop. This is what is remarkable about Ra in the mythology, and it is the thing that I find. And I'm not entirely sure why I'm telling you this, but something about it feels important to say. The thing I find most human about him. He did not stop when he became old. He kept going. He kept making decisions, some of them bad ones. He was deceived, at least once, in a way that cost him more than anything else in his entire history. The story of how Isis learned the secret name of Ra is one of the most quietly extraordinary stories in Egyptian mythology, and it is told in a medical magical papyrus, which means it survived not because someone was archiving cosmic theology, but because a doctor needed the precedent for a healing spell. The frame is utilitarian. The content is anything but. Isis was the great magician. She already knew more magic than any being alive. But there was one thing she did not have: the true name of Ra, the secret name that contained his actual essence, the name that would give whoever spoke it power over the sun itself. This name, Ra guarded above everything. To know a thing's true name in Egyptian magical thinking was to have power over that thing. The name was not a label, but a substance. To speak it correctly was to touch the thing at its root. Isis gathered the spittle of Ra as he walked. The old god drooled because he was ancient, because time had loosened him at his edges. And she mixed it with earth, and she made a serpent from it, and she placed the serpent in Ra's path, and it bit him, and the poison entered the god of the sun, and the god of the sun began to die. He called for his divine physicians. Nothing worked. The poison was made from his own substance, and no medicine could counteract a thing so perfectly aimed. Isis came to him. She said she could heal him. She said she needed his name to do it. He gave her false names. He named himself the maker of this, the creator of that, the one who opened and closed the sky, all the magnificent epithets he carried, all the titles that were true but were not the name. Each time she said, "These are not the name I need." Each time the poison continued. Finally, with the sun dying in him, he gave her the name. He spoke it into her ear, where it would travel from God to God in secret until it reached Horus, who would carry it forward, the knowledge of the true name of the sun passing down through the divine bloodline like an inheritance that could never be spent but only held. Isis healed him. She said the words and the poison left. Ra survived, but he survived diminished, in the way that anyone who's been truly brought low by something they could not overcome is diminished, not broken, but changed, a little more careful, carrying a new knowledge of his own vulnerability. He withdrew further toward the sky, and the gods who remained began to arrange the world without him at its direct center. Now, Thoth. I am going to spend longer on Thoth than his position in the narrative hierarchy might seem to warrant. And I am doing this partly because I find him fascinating, and partly because, in the interest of full honesty, I think the stories about him are among the best we have. So, deliberate overemphasis disclosed. Thoth, Jehuti in Egyptian, was the god of writing, wisdom, the moon, the measurement of time, the recording of judgment, the invention of language. He is depicted with the head of an ibis, or as a baboon, or sometimes as a full human figure with a moon disk on his head. And none of these are inconsistent, because Thoth is the kind of god who is more about function than appearance. What he does matters more than what he looks like. What he does is know things. What he does is write them down. What he does is mediate, witness, calculate, translate, adjudicate. His origin is strange and multiple. In some accounts, he was born from the forehead of Set, the chaotic power of the storm generating, paradoxically, the god of order and record. In others, he sprang from the conflict between Horus and Set, from the exchange of blows, from the meeting of opposites. In still others, he is Atum's heart, the thought of the creator god given independent form. In the Hermopolitan tradition, Hermopolis was his primary city, his house. He is one of 8 primordial gods who existed before creation and helped bring it about, the Ogdoad, the 8 who were the conditions of creation before creation could happen. What these multiple origins share is this: Thoth arrives at the threshold between categories. He is what happens at the edge of things. He is what stands between the dead and the living, the structured and the unstructured, the spoken and the unspoken. When Horus and Set argued before the tribunal of the gods, Thoth was the one who recorded the arguments and calculated the verdict. When the dead arrived in the hall of 2 truths for the weighing of the heart, it was Thoth who recorded the result. His role was not to choose, but to witness correctly, and correct witnessing, in the Egyptian conception of justice, was itself a form of power. He gave humanity the gift of writing. This is not a small thing. This is, in fact, one of the largest things a god can do, because writing is the technology by which time becomes something other than a river that simply carries everything away. With writing, you can arrest the moment. You can say, "This happened, and here is how it happened. And it happened in this year of this king's reign." With writing, the dead can speak to the living. With writing, the gods can be bound by their own words, made to honor what was agreed. Thoth made writing and gave it to humanity, and then he became the keeper of the cosmic record. And then every written word ever produced was, in some sense, an invocation of him. Every text, including the medical magical papyrus that preserved the story of Isis and Ra's name, including the pyramid texts carved in the burial chambers of Old Kingdom pharaohs, including the Book of the Dead that was eventually buried with the wealthy dead to help them navigate the underworld, was under his protection, was a small piece of the archive he maintained. He was also a physician, or at least a dispenser of healing knowledge. When Horus was stung by scorpions in the marshes, it was Thoth who descended with the words of healing. When Ra was poisoned, it was Thoth who assisted Isis, though her magic was the primary instrument. He is the god of remedies, because remedies require precise knowledge of what is wrong and precise language for what must be done about it, and both of these are his domain. His lunar aspect is the one I find most poetically complete. Thoth is the moon, and the moon is the measurer. It divides time into months. It tracks the passage of days. It is the light that is not the sun, the light that borrows and reflects and waxes and wanes without any of the absolute authority of Ra's noon blaze. The moon is the god of second-order knowledge, not the burning thing itself, but the record of the burning thing, not the event, but the account of the event. And this is Thoth exactly. He is the scribe of the sun, the record keeper of Ra, the one who travels in the solar bark, but who is distinguished from Ra by his function. Ra is the source. Thoth is the record. Ra is the fire. Thoth is the count of the fire. There is a story, and I confess I can no longer locate with certainty which version of which text this comes from, but I have kept it because it seems true in the way that some things are true without being documentable. There is a story that Thoth wept when he first transcribed the weighing of a heart that was too heavy, when he first recorded the verdict that sent a soul to destruction rather than to the fields of Aru. He wept, and then he wrote it down anyway, because what is witnessed must be recorded, and what is recorded must be accurate, and the accuracy of the cosmic record is not negotiable even when its contents are terrible. He did not stop keeping the record. He was not allowed to stop. He is still keeping it. Now let us talk about Sekhmet. Sekhmet is the one who returns in this story in multiple forms and at multiple moments, because what she represents, the consuming, destructive aspect of the solar power, the fire that burns rather than warms, the intensity that crosses the line between life-giving and life-taking, is not something that appears once and is resolved. It recurs. She is the lesson the sun keeps teaching about itself. She was born from the eye of Ra, the solar eye that Ra sent as his punishing instrument, that became the lion-headed goddess, that descended on humanity with a force that was supposed to stop when commanded and did not. Her birth is already a story about power exceeding its mandate. Ra intended a corrective force and got annihilation. He intended discipline and got hunger. The gap between what was intended and what was released is Sekhmet. She is a healer as well as a destroyer. This is the paradox that her priests embodied. Because the same ferocity that tears apart can tear apart what is diseased. The burning eye can cauterize. The rage that kills indiscriminately can, when properly controlled and directed, kill specifically. She presided over plagues, and she also presided over the cessation of plagues. And the priests of Sekhmet were physicians and exorcists, and the managers of divine fire. And their work was the work of negotiating with intensity, so that intensity would do what was needed rather than what it wanted. She was never fully tamed. This was the theological consensus. The beer and ochre trick worked once. The assumption was that it would not work again, or that if it did work, it was only because Sekhmet was not trying very hard. She was appeased, propitiated, celebrated with festivals during which her aspect was invoked and then ritually calmed. The New Year festival at Bubastis, the feast of drunkenness at various temples, the great processional celebrations. These were, among other things, the annual project of keeping Sekhmet from deciding to finish what she had started. Her children, or those associated with her, include Nefertum, the god of the lotus blossom, of perfume, of the first scent at the beginning of creation, of beauty so perfect it is physically present as a smell, which is an extraordinary pairing, the destroyer and the delicate, the burning eye and the opening flower. That they were parent and child says something about what the Egyptians believed about the relationship between destructive intensity and the beauty that emerges in intensity's wake. She loved war. She presided over the arrows of soldiers, and she was appeased before battles, and she was thanked or blamed for their outcomes. The pharaoh was sometimes described as going into battle like Sekhmet, which was the highest possible military compliment, and also a warning about what pharaonic power looked like from the wrong end. There was a period, and I want to be careful about the specifics here, because the textual evidence is diffuse and spread across centuries. There was a period when Sekhmet was actively worshipped at Memphis with an intensity that suggests she was understood as perhaps the primary divine force rather than a subsidiary aspect of Ra. Hundreds of statues of her line the processional ways of Memphis, still standing in museum collections around the world. The same face, again and again. The lioness, the solar disk, the uraeus coiled above her brow. Repetition that becomes incantation. The act of multiplying her image was itself a ritual of binding, not restraining her, but surrounding yourself with her, placing yourself inside her attention, making of yourself something she would choose to protect rather than consume. Her name means the powerful one, the she who is powerful. The feminine of power, specifically of a power that is not gentle or maternal, but fierce and specific and terminal. She and Hathor are, in some accounts, the same goddess, the same divine feminine principle, expressed at different temperatures. Hathor as love and music and joy and fertility, Sekhmet as the consuming fire, and somewhere between them, the range of what the sun can mean to the things that live in its light. I need to pause here. We've covered a tremendous amount of ground. Cosmogony, the ages of divine rule, the great crisis of Osiris's murder, the trial of Horus and Set, 4 of the major divine figures. And I want to make sure before we continue that the texture of what this all means is landing, not just the sequence of events. Because there is something about the Egyptian theological project that is easy to miss if you read it too quickly. And it is this: the Egyptians were not trying to explain the sun. They were trying to explain why the sun keeps going. They were trying to understand persistence in the face of the forces that oppose it. Apophis is real. Chaos is real. Destruction has a name and a face and a preferred form. And every morning, against all of that, the scarab rolls the disk over the horizon. Every morning is an argument won. Now let us talk about the great battle, the one that gathered all these forces, that compressed them into a single conflict the Egyptians returned to again and again as the template for every subsequent conflict worth commemorating. The conflict between Horus and Set, which I have already described in its judicial form, was also a physical conflict, a series of battles that the myths describe in terms both metaphysical and bodily, in ways that resist easy summary, but demand full treatment. Because the body is important. Because what happened to the bodies of these gods in the course of their conflict is the reason the world has the shape it does. They fought each other across the sky and the earth and the waters of the Nile. Set attacked Horus and took his eye, the left eye, the lunar eye, the eye that governed night and moisture and healing. Some accounts say he swallowed it. Some say he tore it out and it fell to earth and was found by Thoth. Horus attacked Set and wounded him in the testicles or castrated him entirely, depending on the version, which is why Set, in some accounts, became sterile, which is why the desert does not produce, which is why the Chaos Land is also the barren land. These are not symbolic wounds only. The gods bled and hurt and lost things. The divine body was subject to violence. And when divine things are lost, they become something else in the world. The lost eye of Horus, found and healed by Thoth, and then given to Osiris, becomes the Wedjat, the eye of Horus, the amulet of healing and protection that was placed on every mummified body, that was painted on the prows of boats to help them navigate, that appeared in millions of artifacts across 3,000 years of Egyptian material culture. The wound became the cure. The lost thing, found and restored, became a gift. The battle went on for so long that the gods grew tired. Re grew impatient. Letters were sent to and fro between the tribunal and the combatants, and even the letters had an exhausted quality, a sense of please. Let this end. The gods could not reach agreement because they could not agree on what mattered more, legitimacy or strength. Horus had the right. Set had the power. The question the Egyptians kept asking themselves in their theology and in their politics was whether rightness and power could coexist in the same vessel, or whether the world would always be negotiating between them. The answer the story gave was both. Both must exist. The Pharaoh of Egypt was given 2 crowns, the white crown of Upper Egypt, traditionally associated with Horus, and the red crown of Lower Egypt, traditionally associated with Set. And when he wore both together, the double crown, he was the embodiment of the resolved tension. He was the living proof that the conflict could end, that the trial could reach a verdict, that order and chaos could be placed in relation without one destroying the other. The coronation was a victory over entropy every time. The war between Horus and Set is also in deeper water, the war between the Black Land and the Red Land, the fertile and the barren, the life-giving Nile and the burning desert. Egypt exists in one of the most dramatic environmental contrasts on Earth. The narrow ribbon of cultivable soil along the Nile, and then immediately, without transition, the dead sand. The gods embodied this geography. Horus was the fertile land, the green god, the one who made things grow. Set was the desert, the storm, the wind that brought the sand down on everything that tried to grow. And Egypt was the act of maintaining the boundary between them, of keeping the two in their proper relationship, of ensuring that the desert did not swallow the Nile and the Nile did not become a swamp. The pharaoh maintained this boundary. The irrigation systems maintained this boundary. The priests maintained this boundary with ritual and with prayer. The Ma'at, the cosmic principle of rightness, order, truth, the feather against which the heart was weighed. Ma'at was this balance maintained, the proper relationship between things that would otherwise devour each other. The Great War was also then a war about whether Ma'at could survive. And every morning that the sun rose, Ma'at had survived another night. After the verdict, after the trial found its resolution, after Horus was confirmed as king and Set was given his dominion in the storm and the desert, the gods who had assembled for the great tribunal dispersed back to their functions, and the world entered the age that the Egyptians recognized as their own, the age of human kings, the age of the pharaoh. The pharaoh was not simply a political ruler. The pharaoh was the mediating force between the divine order and the human world. He was Horus in life, the falcon-headed god, the Sky Lord, the one who had won the right to sit on the throne of his father. He was Osiris in death, the Green Man, the one who had been dismembered and reassembled, and who now ruled the dead with patience and wisdom. The two roles were not contradictory. They were sequential. Every pharaoh acted out the same story. The son inheriting from the father, the living king eventually becoming the judge of the dead, his successor stepping into the Horus role. This is why the funeral rites in Egypt were so elaborate, so codified, so essential. They were not simply grief expressed through ritual. They were the mechanism of divine succession. If the rites were performed incorrectly, if the body was not properly preserved, if the book of the dead was not buried with the deceased, if the spells were not spoken, then the succession would fail. The dead king would not become Osiris. The living heir would not be able to fully become Horus. The divine chain would break. Mummification was not about preserving the body for sentimental reasons. It was about maintaining the vessel that the divine essence needed to inhabit in the afterlife, the Ka and the Ba, the two aspects of the self that survived death, the vital force and the animating personality, needed the body to return to, needed it recognizable, needed it intact enough to serve as an anchor. The elaborate process of wrapping, of placing protective amulets, including the Eye of Horus, at specific points on the body, of inserting the Ushepti figurines that would do the work of the deceased in the afterlife. All of this was maintenance of the cosmic machinery. The priests of Amun, who would eventually control more of Egypt's land and wealth than the pharaoh himself, were not simply performing power politics when they asserted the primacy of their god. They were claiming custodianship of the cosmic mechanism. Whoever controlled the right ritual, whoever held the correct words in the correct order, had leverage over the divine succession itself. This is why the conflict between the pharaoh Akhenaten and the Amun priesthood was not merely religious. It was a struggle over who controlled the machine that kept the sun going. Anyway, Akhenaten, the singular pharaoh, the aberration in the solar story, or perhaps its most extreme expression, depending on how you read him. Amenhotep IV, who renamed himself Akhenaten, who ruled in the 14th century BCE, who closed the temples of the traditional gods, who moved the capital to a new city built from nothing in the desert, who declared that there was only one god, and that God was the Atum, the solar disk, the actual disk, the physical phenomenon of the sun's light, not the personality-laden divine figure of Ra or Amun-Ra, but the bare material fact of the sun itself. The Atum hymn attributed to Akhenaten is one of the most beautiful pieces of religious poetry from the ancient world, and it has attracted the attention of later scholars, partly because of its resemblance to Psalm 104, which has sparked a debate about influence and precedent that I won't try to resolve here. What the hymn does is praise the sun as the sole source of all life, the one light from which everything else derives, the creator who is present in every birth and every death and every breath between them. It is monotheism, or something so close to monotheism that the distinction hardly matters for the immediate purposes. Akhenaten's theology stripped away the vast accumulation of divine personality, the divine court, the family dramas of the gods, the battles between Horus and Set, the weighing of the heart. It removed the intermediaries. It said, there is the disk, and there is the pharaoh who communicates with the disk, and there is everyone else. The pharaoh alone could speak to the Aten. Everyone else had to go through the pharaoh. It lasted in its pure form, perhaps 17 years. After Akhenaten's death, his successors, including the boy king Tutankhamun, who was probably his son, reversed the program with a thoroughness that suggests the traditional priesthood had been waiting with barely contained fury for the opportunity. Akhenaten's images were defaced. His name was removed from monuments. His city was abandoned and then quarried for its stone. He was called the heretic in later records, the one whose name was not to be spoken, which is the Egyptian equivalent of damnation, since to have one's name spoken was to remain alive in the world of the living. But here is the anachronistic thing, the thing that surfaces and then I pull it back because it doesn't quite belong here, except that it does. Looking at Akhenaten's project from this distance, what he was doing was not so different from what every reformer in every religious tradition has done. He was trying to strip away the accretion, the centuries of added complexity, and find the thing itself, the original, the first mound in the primordial waters, the bare fact of the sun. He may have been wrong to do it the way he did it. He may have been a tyrant using theological reform as a mechanism of political control. He may have been a genuine visionary. The evidence supports multiple readings, and the readings say as much about the readers as about the man. What is clear is this: after he was gone, the sun continued to rise, and the priests continued to say the morning hymns, and the solar bark continued its passage through the underworld. And Apophis was stabbed with ritual knives every morning in temples up and down the Nile. The machine kept running. The machine is very old and very stubborn, and does not stop for one pharaoh's convictions, however sincere. The cult of Amun-Ra, the syncretic combination of the hidden god of Thebes with the solar power of Heliopolis, is the form that solar worship took in its most politically influential period, and it is worth understanding what that combination meant. Amun, whose name means the hidden one, was a god of mysterious, invisible power, the wind that cannot be seen, but that fills sails and moves seeds across the landscape. Ra was the visible sun, the undeniable blaze. The combination of the two was the proclamation that power has both a visible and an invisible dimension, that the sun you can see is also a sun you cannot see, that what is present is also always more than what is present. The Amun-Ra priesthood accumulated temples, lands, workers, political influence, and eventually something approaching co-sovereignty with the pharaoh. The high priests of Amun in the late New Kingdom had their own armies, their own foreign policy, their own succession to the office. When the political authority of the pharaoh weakened, as it did during the Third Intermediate Period, when Egypt fractured into regional powers and the great centralized state of the New Kingdom dissolved, the Amun priesthood in Thebes was one of the structures that maintained enough coherence to survive. The gods outlasted the state. They did this by being embedded in the daily life, the agricultural cycle, the medical practice, the funerary practice, the dreams of ordinary people who had no access to the great temples, but who knew that the sun rose each morning and that someone, somewhere, was responsible for it. The last period of genuine independent Egyptian religious practice, before the Greek Ptolemies, before the Romans, before Christianity, was a period of extraordinary theological creativity. The late temples, especially at Edfu and Dendera and Philae, were covered with inscriptions that preserved deliberately and with the urgency of a culture that knows it is running out of time, the accumulated knowledge of 3,000 years of sacred tradition. The priests of the late period were archivists as much as celebrants, scholars as much as ritual specialists. They knew what was coming. They could not stop it, but they could write it down. The solar mythology survived into the Ptolemaic period with the help of a peculiar institution. The Greek kings of Egypt simply adopted Egyptian religious identity. Ptolemy wore the double crown. He performed the rituals. He was Horus and would become Osiris officially in the eyes of the Egyptian priests who needed the machine to keep running and were willing to adapt its human operator. The gods did not care who stood before them in the pharaoh's linen kilt. They cared that someone did. Let me try an analogy that I'm not sure works. A figure moving through fog, reaching out to touch something solid, finding the shape but not the surface. The way the Egyptian solar theology functioned in this period was something like a river that has gone underground, still flowing, still finding its way through the rock, not visible from above, but present in the springs that feed the oases. The gods were underground. The formal state machinery of Egyptian religion was being replaced slowly, then quickly, by something else. First, the Greek Olympians in various syncretic combinations, then the Roman imperial cult, then eventually, in the 4th century, CE Christianity. But the underground river still ran. Isis was the last of the Egyptian gods to have an active non-Egyptian cult. Her worship spread across the Roman Empire, to the Rhine, to the Thames, to the deserts of Arabia, carried by merchants and soldiers and freedwomen who had seen in her something that the other gods did not offer. The mother who searched and gathered and used intelligence rather than force, the goddess who had faced the worst thing and had not stopped moving, who had outwitted a god and healed her dead husband and protected her infant son and pursued justice across 80 years of argument. She was the shape of endurance with a human face. The solar theology, the specific technical architecture of Ra and Khepri and Atum and Apophis and the solar bark, this was less portable, less emotionally accessible, more tied to the physical geography of Egypt and the particular rituals of the Nile Valley. It did not spread. What spread was the underlying structure, the daily death and resurrection, the descent into darkness and the return, the night journey and the morning triumph. Christianity took this structure and made it historical, located it in a specific time, a specific body, a specific tomb outside a specific city. The solar structure became biographical. The recurring cosmic pattern became a singular event with singular weight. But the pattern itself is older than the event. The scarab was rolling the disk over the horizon long before the first Christmas, long before the first Passover. The morning hymn of gratitude, "You have come, the light has returned," was ancient when Moses was born. This is not an argument about influence exactly. It is an observation about resonance. The human mind, faced with the daily miracle of sunrise, tends toward the same shapes: gratitude, relief, the sense that it was not guaranteed, the naming of whoever made it happen. The solar gods of Egypt are gone in the sense that no one today stands in a temple at dawn and recites the formal words to Ra in the ancient language, expecting Ra to respond. This is true. The tradition is broken. The chain of transmission is severed in the way that all chains eventually sever. But the morning is still early, and the light is still arriving, and there is still something in the human body that registers the return of the light as a kind of grace. Call it evolutionary, the mammalian relief at surviving another night of predators. Call it aesthetic. The particular gold of early light is simply beautiful. Call it theological. The sun is coming up, and something decided that it would. All three explanations are available. The Egyptians would have recognized all three and would have told you that they are not three explanations, but one, seen from different angles. What remains of the sun gods is this: the shape of what they understood, the structure, the recognition that the sun involves a journey that has a dark passage at its center, that the light costs something, that the return is earned. This structure, descent and return, death and resurrection, the night journey that makes the morning possible, is not Egyptian property. It never was. It was the Egyptians' version of something that the human mind discovers independently whenever it looks at the sky long enough. There is a late text. I cannot, in good conscience, give you a precise citation because the textual history is complicated and my certainty about the specific papyrus involved is not high enough to stake the claim with confidence. There is a late text in which a priest of Ra is described watching the sunrise from the roof of the Heliopolis temple, and in the moment of the disk appearing over the horizon, he is described as weeping, not from grief. The word is the same word used for the tears of Ra that became humanity. They are creation tears, overflow tears, the tears that come when something is too full to contain itself. He wept because the sun came up. He had said the words and burned the incense and stabbed the effigy of Apophis, and the sun came up, and he wept. This is what faith looks like when it is old enough and honest enough. Not certainty, not the comfortable knowledge that it will definitely work again tomorrow. Faith is the weeping priest on the temple roof who has done everything he can and watches and waits, and when the disk appears over the horizon, cannot contain what he feels, which is gratitude too large for the body that holds it. The solar bark is still crossing the sky. The scarab is still rolling the disk. Apophis is still in the dark below, and the spears of the divine crew are still driving into his terrible head. The cosmic machinery turns, and every morning in Cairo, in New York, in a marshland in Turkey, in a truck stop somewhere on an unnamed highway, wherever you happen to be listening from, the light comes back. Good night and good morning, wherever that finds you.